Hello and welcome. My name's Simon Timpley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Welcome to this special webinar, Outside In Mapping Food Processing's Pest Hotspots with Orkin and Chelle Hartzer, our special guest. Just to say, yes, type in the sidebar, tell us where you're joining us from. It's always interesting to know. Please do hold your questions until after the PowerPoint, or else they'll just scroll into oblivion and we'll miss them. So please leave your questions till the end. This is Chelle's second time, isn't it, Chelle? Yeah, you was last year.
Yeah.
So welcome again. Can you just tell the audience where you're joining us from today, Chelle?
Sure. I'm Chelle Hartzer. I'm based out of the Atlanta, Georgia area in the United States and work for Orkin.
Great. Okay, shall we get the presentation going? I'll be back later. I'll switch my webcam off if you can, Chelle.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it to you. Over to you, Chelle.
All right. This is so wonderful to see all of you on here. Thank you so much. We've got people from all over the world. This is so exciting. New Hampshire, whoever was just from New Hampshire. I grew up there in Derry, New Hampshire, so shout out to my home state there. All right, let's get this rolling here. We're going to talk about hotspots, where you might find pests. And this is pretty dependent. All of you know that your facilities are going to be slightly different. There's going to be slightly different issues, slightly different pests, slightly different products. So, take this as a kind of a suggestion. And again, if we have some questions, we can always go into some more specifics. And you folks are always welcome to contact me at the end of this. My email is on the end of this, and I'm on LinkedIn and everything else, so you can find me. But before we even talk about hotspots, we do need to talk a little bit about IPM, Integrated Pest Management. This is our toolbox. This is a set of tools. It's a process. Pest management, whether you're doing it yourself, you're doing it in-house, or you have a third party, this is not just one little thing. This is a process of how this happens. We have to look at the identification of the pests that we're dealing with. We have to factor in sanitation. And right now, of course, sanitation is a big word with everything going on. We have to look at exclusion of how to keep these things out in the first place, monitoring to see how we're doing. Are they getting in? Are they increasing, decreasing? And of course, treatments. Treatments are part of an integrated plan. And when we talk about this specific to food facilities, whether that's food storage, initial processing, further processing, warehousing at the end, we all know that there's food there. We can't clean up that food source because you're producing that food source. So when we talk about pest management, when we talk about these hotspots, it's about ensuring that you know where they are, what they are, so that we can minimize those issues. We often can't eliminate them. When we look at the outside of a facility, and we tend to think inside the box, inside the facility, keeping it nice and clean and neat. But many of our issues do tend to start on the outside of these facilities. We do have native populations of many of these pests, especially when it comes to rodents, when we think of the rats, the mice, birds, and even many insects. These things start on the outside, and then we give them those entry points to get in. So take a look around your facility. There might be some big things that, let's be honest, you can't get to fixing right away. You may have a giant hole in your wall or something. But if we know where those sites are, we can keep an eye on them. No joke, I had a facility in Mississippi in the United States that literally had a 2-inch hole in the wall that I watched rats moving back and forth. They couldn't fix that because they were using it. They were installing new pipes, but we knew it was there. And so what we did is we set up lots of traps and lots of bait stations right around that area so that we could minimize the impact of it. So again, as we go through this, think of this not necessarily as fixing it right this second, right this minute, but keeping an eye on some of these areas. We want to make sure that the landscaping is kind of trimmed back. All living things need food, water, and shelter. And when we look at the landscaping, those plants, those trees, those bushes, those provide a lot of shelter for rodents, for birds, for insects, and they can also be a food source. So if we're putting these things right up against a facility, then we're giving them free access and easy access to go right in that doorway, right through that window, right into that dock door, because we've put them right there. We also want to look at those large trees, anything that connects to the building. I tend to think in the terms of large trees and roof rats. I've watched roof rats go from their nesting site in a tree to the roof of a food plant, down through a skylight, and into a food processing facility to gather food and then go right back out. Had another situation with a landscaping situation that it was in a pharmaceutical facility that all of a sudden we started seeing thrips. And thrips are tiny little insects that tend to feed on plant nectar, flowers, things like that. Well, turns out there was a large tree right outside a window that led one room away from this clean room. So by correctly IDing our pest, correctly IDing the tree that it was coming from, we were able to address that, and we sealed up that window as well. So think of these things as you're walking around your facility. Do you see those connection points, those areas where those bushes, those trees are providing a runway for these pests to go from their habitat outside to your habitat on the inside? On the outside, we also want to look at any trash areas. Dumpster areas are obviously a food source for pests. And while in the food processing, food storage industry, dumpsters are usually emptied fairly regularly. You don't see them overflowing too much. Um, but the areas around dumpsters often don't get cleaned very well. So underneath them, even the dumpster itself, if you're putting a lot of food waste into a dumpster, they come, they empty that dumpster, maybe they throw a new one back, maybe it's the same old one, and it's still got a lot of food waste in there. So you have that constant food supply, and dumpsters are hard to clean out. If we can, we always want those dumpsters to be away from buildings, away from those structures. But let's be honest, oftentimes they're right there, right up against the building, because it's that way it makes it easier to throw out that trash. And they're often right by personnel doors. So it's not possible to move them. But again, we don't necessarily have to do that. We have to realize that that is a very high risk area. We have a personnel door right there that could be allowing these pests in. And it's a known hotspot now, so we can keep a better eye on it. Maybe we can put additional devices like extra insect light traps by that doorway so that we can reduce that population that's coming in. Maybe we can do some extra sanitation to, again, get some of that food source down a little bit. When we talk about these hotspots, it's about recognizing that they're there. If we have corrective actions that we can use on them, great, do it. Don't hold back. But if they're harder to address, maybe take some capital input. Maybe it takes a tree company coming out and tearing down that tree. These things may take a while. So you can put mitigation into effect. The problem doesn't go away, but there can be some corrective actions to mitigate some of the problems that it's causing. We also see low spots. We see water. Again, all living things need food, water, and shelter. And many of our water loving insects aren't necessarily food pests, but there's still a contamination issue. Like I said with the thrips, those thrips aren't going to aren't going to cause, an infestation inside a building, but there's still a contamination issue that we can't have there. Things like midges and mosquitoes that may be breeding in standing water that's around the facility can get in, can cause an issue with that. Had another facility that was had a beautiful pond, beautiful landscaping outside, and every spring the geese came. And anybody who's ever dealt with geese knows that number one, they're mean. They can bite people. They are mean. They can be aggressive, and also they tend to eat a lot. And what goes in must come out. So these geese themselves weren't necessarily the problem and weren't in the facility. However, the feces that they were leaving behind on the sidewalks and on the parking lot, people were walking through that every single day to go into the facility. And again, a contamination issue. We were actually able to eliminate the geese, but in the time that it took us to do that, which was a couple weeks, we had to install foot baths, extra cleaning areas to make sure that employees, as they were coming in, their shoes were clean and they weren't bringing that feces into the facility where they were producing food. So, again, sometimes you think a little secondary and even tertiary problems. Sure, we've got moisture out in the parking lot. Sure, there might be some mosquitoes there. May not sound like an issue if you're producing a breakfast cereal, but if those pests get into the facility, if there's lots of them, those are a contamination issue. We don't want to bring in salmonella or listeria or E. coli from animal feces that's right outside the door. So look for some of those water spots as well. If you can address them, great. If not, find those mitigation points to lessen the impact of the problems that they're causing. Lighting is also another one that can be very difficult to deal with. In most cases, it's already installed. Your lighting on the outside, somebody put it up a decade ago and it's still there. And it would take a lot to move it or a lot to change it. However, you can always, change out the light bulbs to an LED or a sodium vapor light, which will reduce the attractiveness of those night flying insects. We have to have lights outside in many cases for safety. We want our employees, we want the drivers at night to be safe. And so we have to have that well lit area. But can we redirect those lights just a little bit so they're not directly pointing at the building, so they're not directly pointing at a doorway? And one of the other interesting hot spots to think about is when you are on the outside looking in, especially at night. And I would highly recommend doing inspections at night every so often. You see incredibly interesting stuff. Look at what light is coming out of your facility, not just necessarily the lighting on the outside, but consider those offices, those entryways with those big glass vestibules, offices and labs, if they have windows. Is there light pouring out of those windows at night that is, again, attracting those insects in towards your facility? The more that's out there, the more risk of them getting in. So in some cases, can we ask the employees, hey, when you're done at the end of the evening, please turn off your lights before you leave. And then therefore we reduce that. So basically, if you're standing on the outside of your facility, you can see those lights pouring out. If there's a way to turn those off, that will help. Again, not the easiest thing in the world, but something to think about. If they can't be turned off, can we seal up those doors at night? In a lot of cases, a lot of facilities I work with, will have different entryways. So, office personnel may go in that door because it's close to their offices, while frontline workers may go in this door over here, and truck drivers may go in this door over here. At night, with maybe half the facility not there anymore, can we seal up those doors and make sure that they're fully closed at night? So think of ways to address these hot spots when you find them, these corrective actions. Sometimes you can get a little creative with them, which is awesome. Of course, our very common, very obvious openings on the outside, our windows, our doors, our dock doors, personnel doors. Basically, any openings that connect the inside to the outside are going to be potential entry points to all of our pests. That could be a bird, that could be a rodent, that could be an insect. So ensure that you are regularly inspecting these. And that's the key. We know that the doors are there. We know that the dock seals got replaced 6 months ago, but are they still in good working order? Is that door seal that you put in a year ago still adequate? Is it still sealing up that space? So that regular inspection is going to allow you to find these hot spots when they're still small, when it's just a small opening that maybe just a couple insects can get into, versus when it's a big opening 6 months later and rats can fit through it. So that regular inspection is going to be key to identify these hot spots and fix them early. And remember that that inspection is part of IPM. It's part of the process. So when we catch these issues early, again, we can fix them. We can prevent issues. We can prevent the pest issues from getting worse. One site I had, we suddenly started seeing an influx of night flying insects in our insect light traps by a couple doors. And we couldn't figure it out because the doors were sealing very nicely. We knew that our lighting on the outside was actually pretty good. So we couldn't understand why we suddenly, over a couple weeks, were starting to see more and more of these insects getting into the facility and getting trapped in those insect light traps. Well, finally, what we found out is that they were doing some construction on this facility, and the construction crews came in overnight. And as they did so, they left the doors propped open because they didn't have keys to them. So the first person would come in, unlock the door, and leave it propped open for everybody else for a couple hours during the night. So we alerted the construction crew as to why they needed to keep the doors shut. They actually got them more keys, so it wasn't an issue anymore, and our problem went down. So these hotspots that we look for are sometimes a little tricky because you look at it and say, that door is sealed. How can something get into it? And again, this is why I encourage night inspections every so often, because what goes on during the day is not always what goes on at other hours when it's dark out, when it's raining out. So think of some of these different times that you can do some of these inspections to find some of these hot spots. And of course, I think the one part that gets overlooked quite a bit is the roof. The roof is something that people don't access very much. Nobody goes up there on a regular basis. And there's so many openings on the roof level. You have your vents, you have HVAC systems, your air handling systems in a lot of cases. You may have recirculation fans up there. You have a lot of openings that rarely get checked up there. And those are all, again, your potential entry points. Those are all those points that those insects, those roof rats are going to use to get in. Another thing to especially check on the roof is for roof leaks. We know that, when it rains, the water may stand up there and you may get standing water that could create some of those mosquitoes, some of those midge issues, or it could be leaking down into the facility. I had another facility that was a packaging facility. They produced the packaging for different food items. So they weren't producing a food, but it was the packages that would then get filled with food. And all of a sudden, we started seeing that increase of our mold feeding, our fungus feeding insects, and it was in some weird places. It was kind of toward the middle of the facility, so we knew it wasn't coming in through a door. There were no cracks and crevices that were like on the outside edge of the building. Come to find out from talking to some of the employees, they said, "Oh yeah, on the other side of this wall is this old tunnel system, and every time it rains, there's a roof leak, and there's standing water on the other side of this wall." Turns out those fungal feeding insects were then using this pathway underneath this wall to come into the facility. Hard to tell if it's not raining. Hard to tell if you don't see that standing water. So I kind of make these things sound easy, like, oh, we had more insects, we found the problem, we fixed it. But trust me, these things were not easy. These things took months to suss out and to figure out and to get to the root of these problems. So if we know where some of these potential issues are, we can inspect those areas a little bit more, focus our time and effort on some of those areas that we know can be an issue. All right, let's switch gears here towards the inside. Lots of potential hotspots on the inside, and each facility is different. And that, again, that regular inspection is going to help you keep an eye on things. You know your facility, your employees know your facility. So I bet if you went around and asked a bunch of your frontline employees, hey, what's been going on? Have you noticed anything around here? I bet you they point out a whole bunch of stuff. So definitely involve everybody in this process. But when you do look around your facility with whatever's going on, whatever type of equipment you have, a good rule of thumb is to carefully monitor any areas that are hard to get to. Think of some of your pieces of equipment, or think of some of your storage areas that just kind of hard to get around them, hard to get through them. Anything that's hard to get to, anything that's hard to see is going to be a hot spot because, let's be honest, if it's hard to get to, if it's hard to see, you're not going to be inspecting it quite as much, which, is a bit counterintuitive if you think of it. But again, identifying those areas and trying to inspect them more, putting out extra monitoring devices near them, so that can be your system of inspection, is a really good thing. So each facility is going to be a little bit different. You kind of have to map out your own facility and find out what works. If you're doing any type of wet processing, you probably have some drains, and you've probably had some issues with drains in the past. Obviously, if you're doing dry processing, your drains may not be as much of an issue. But any drains are, again, those entry points into your facility. So this is a potential hotspot. And of course, food source as well. I mean, if you open up some drains, I've been in a number of facilities where I've popped open some drains, and I can't believe that water can even flow through them. There's so much material in them, and that's a great food source for cockroaches, for flies, and again, that entry point to allow those things into your site. So the best bet here is really keep your drains on a regular sanitation schedule. Remember that small flies can develop in as little as 7 days. So if you have a lot of wet processing, you have a lot of wet going down those drains, small flies are going to be a potential issue. And you can head that off at the pass by making sure that regular drain cleaning happens to clean out that material, to flush it down, to not give them the habitat, not give them the food source. Another fun story for you. I was in a bakery that was doing some wet processing, and it was an older facility, and they had this one area that had kind of sunk down. I mean, the facility just, naturally kind of sunk and settled. And there was this one area that, they'd wash the floor, and the water just did not get to the drain. The floors did not slope to that drain anymore. So we had this area that just consistently was wet. And of course, there was food material in it. So we had small fly issues. We couldn't fix that. We couldn't fix the building settling. We couldn't fix that it was not sloping to the drain. So what they actually wound up doing is putting up a temporary plastic wall that contained that area. So yes, there were still some small flies in there. Yes, there was still a water issue, but now we weren't letting those flies out into the rest of the facility. So, I mentioned, getting a little creative sometimes with some of these problem-solving tools. But think about that. Sometimes we cannot eliminate the structural issue. We cannot eliminate the sanitation issue. But can we minimize it? Can we isolate it? I talked a bit about exclusion and making sure that we kept the outside pests on the outside, but we can also think a little bit about exclusion as an inside issue. Can we exclude this room from everything else? Can we exclude this area from everything else? Think of some of your employee areas. Your employee areas are separated from your processing, from your storage areas. And there's a reason for that. It's to keep that separation and to keep those two things separate from each other. So whether you have dry processing and you still have a couple drains, or you have wet processing, keep an eye on those drains. Keep an eye on that water flow, and definitely keep those drains clean. We also see storage areas. Storage areas, when we talk about this, I'm not necessarily talking about product storage, like your incoming ingredients or your outgoing finished product. I'm talking more about maintenance rooms, janitor closets, electrical rooms, these kind of offshoots to your processing and food storage areas. As I mentioned, the areas that you need to take a look at and to keep a better eye on are those areas that you do not see a lot, that are out of sight. So that maintenance area that's behind that closed door, or that janitor closet that only gets opened once a week to pull out a mop. These areas, again, can be a harborage spot. So that's a hot spot for a number of different pests. I see a lot of rodents in maintenance areas. I see a lot of insect problems in electrical rooms, especially for dry processing, because you get that flour, that dry dust that gets underneath the door into those little vents and into that room that people only go into once every 6 months. So you've got that food source, it's safe in there, and now we've got pest problems. So when you start to see some things pop up, think about what maybe nearby your processing area, what might be near to where this problem is starting. We also want to remember, if we kind of switch gears to your actual food storage, whether that's that incoming or outgoing products, remember FIFO, remember first in, first out. Uh, these products come in most cases, you're using them pretty quickly, but the longer a product sits there, the more chance it has to become infested. So I have some pet food plants that produce a lot of different brands, a lot of different lines of pet food. And sometimes they have a specialty brand that they'll produce, but they won't sell all of it right away. And it will sit in the warehouse for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. And now we have that potential to have 3, 4, 5 generations of insects that could potentially be developing in there. So remember, as a product comes in, it should be dated. You should be watching not just the expiration dates of products, but their entry date into your facility. And so watch that, make sure the oldest product gets used first, your oldest product goes out of your facility first. Had a situation where we had a big super stack of almonds that had gotten stuck in a back corner. People forgot about it, and 2 years later, we found the Indian meal moth infestation pretty fast when we found that super sack of almonds that had gotten forgotten. So when we talk about storage areas, again, it's those non-food storage areas, but it's also your storage areas. And clutter. Every site that I have ever been to has what I call a graveyard. It has this little area in the warehouse, whether it's the incoming warehouse or outgoing warehouse, that has that pile of old equipment, old boxes, old paperwork, old something, because people have stashed it in the corner. And so I call these graveyards, because you can literally watch the dust accumulate on them. That is a great hotspot for pests, because you're not moving it around very much. It's just sitting there. So you have a nice safe space that doesn't get moved, doesn't get disturbed. You probably have some food in there because, it's gotten blown around. You had, a pallet of something that sat next to it, and that pallet leaked a little bit. So all of these graveyard areas, all of these areas that are overly cluttered, are a great hotspot for pests getting in, establishing, and causing big problems. So again, can you move that graveyard area? Can you move all that old equipment? Probably not. Can you keep a better eye on it and ensure that you've got no issues going on? Absolutely, you can. And your equipment that's on the floor. Let's be honest, especially if you have an older facility, equipment back then was not made and not designed to be cleaned. I was in a bakery that they are using the mixers, the bread dough mixers from World War II. They're great, they work. They are impossible to clean. So we know that we're going to have issues around there. If you have some newer equipment, hey, sometimes even the newer equipment isn't the best design for cleaning. So when you can get in there and clean it, get it cleaned to the best of your ability. But we also have to remember that many of your facilities are running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So when does that even shut down for you to be able to clean? So when you can clean it, great. Get in there, clean it. In the meantime, again, identify it as a potential hotspot. Keep extra monitors there, and focus more inspection time. Shout out, I don't know if we have anybody from Nebraska on here, but there's a flour mill in Nebraska, in a little town called Juanita, Nebraska, that has been in operation since 1925. I've been there a couple times, and they are still using equipment from 1925. Guesses on how many times since 1925 it's been cleaned? I'm guessing it's probably in the single digits. But we know it's there, we know what's happening, so we can keep an eye on that. And it's a very cool flour mill as well. So very neat place if you're ever out in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. We also want to keep an eye on anything that's got a 90-degree angle. Of course, our floor wall junctions, where the floor meets the wall, that 90-degree angle is a great place for food to build up. In a lot of facilities, this is a great entry point from the outside or from the soil, because these walls don't seal very well. The floor may not be sealed all the way down. So not just a food point, but a potential entry point as well. You don't want to, if you're a pest, if you're a mouse or even a beetle, you don't necessarily want to be out in the middle of the floor where all that scary machinery is going. All these people are stomping around. You want to be up against that wall, up against that safe spot. So not only is that an entry point, not only is that a food source, that's a safe runway for many of our pests. Again, being aware of that, this is why you see many monitoring devices, many traps that are often located on those outside perimeter walls. Not because, we like it and it's out of the way, but it is because it's out of the way. And those are the areas that the mice, the insects are going to use as a pathway to avoid us, to avoid the machinery, as a safe spot and as their food spot. So we can, increase traps when we start to see evidence of that happening. These pathways that they're going to travel, if we put devices, if we put those traps as monitors in their way, we have a better idea of what's going on with them. So another great hotspot to kind of keep an eye on. We tend to keep production areas really nice and clean. Again, as I said, we think inside the box. We think inside those processing areas, inside those warehouses. Typically, sanitation is pretty good. We can often forget about some of the other areas, the offices where people may eat their lunch, the break rooms where employees come and have their food. We often forget about these areas. And one of the hot spots that I always look for, especially in break rooms, is vending machines and refrigerators. Because if you think about it, when was the last time somebody moved that vending machine and cleaned underneath or behind it? And vending machines, refrigerators, microwaves, they have a little motor on them. That motor keeps things nice and warm. So now you have a nice warm spot and a safe spot for these pests. I've seen infestations inside, especially with flies and cockroaches, infestations inside microwaves because they've gotten in those little vents on the side. And there's a food source. It's nice and warm. There's a water source nearby. So perfect habitat. So keep an eye on those vending machines. Please move them at least every 6 months and try and clean underneath them. And look at where your break areas are. Had a situation in a hospital that they were getting small flies into their operating room, and again, this was internal. There was no outside source. The drains were clean in the operating rooms. Come to find out, they had transitioned an old office into a break room that was right outside these operating rooms. And so people were taking their lunch in there. There were sodas, sweets, there was wet, there was food. And the flies were breeding in this room that wasn't even supposed to be a break room, and getting into these sensitive areas. So check those, and locker rooms, any area that people are potentially going to bring outside food in is going to be a hot spot for some of these pests. And again, if we can contain them, if we can isolate them to these areas, elimination is the best. But even if we can contain them so they don't get out onto that processing floor, that's a huge help. We also have everything that comes in and goes out of your facility. And this just goes back to food, water, and shelter. This is exactly what your site offers. You have food, and we know that you can't fix everything. You can't eliminate the food source because, well, then what would you produce? You know, if we took away all your incoming ingredients that are food, you would have nothing to make something else with. So we just have to keep an eye on these things. Most of you probably have supplier verification programs in place. You are inspecting your raw ingredients as they come in. You are washing your processing lines so that you know as your goods go to the end of that line and get packaged and ready for shipment out, they're all set and they're pest free. So again, it's about knowing where your hotspots may be, knowing which raw ingredients are going to be the most prone to having pests, whether that's just because that's the ingredient or the area that they're coming from. Just knowing this, we can mitigate this, we can isolate this. If you know that every time you have cinnamon come into your facility to make oatmeal raisin cookies, one of my favorites, we know that that cinnamon, every time it comes in, has some beetles in it. Well, we can isolate that cinnamon from all of our other ingredients so it doesn't spread. And then we can treat that and eliminate that from that source before it can spread to the oats and the raisins and the flour and everything else that is going into my oatmeal raisin cookie. You know, this allows us to really focus our attention and resources where they're most needed. Identifying the hot spots allows you to focus that attention. And you know, especially now with corona and covid around the world, sanitation becomes even more important. I haven't touched too much on disinfection per se, but if you are interested in disinfection services, again, you can reach out to me with more information. But general sanitation is again great for pest management and, you know, for the rest of your food process and your food safety system. So I should mention, you know, I talk about a bunch of these scenarios that I've been involved in, and I know, you know, when I did, I may have made it sound easy. You know, hey, we found the problem, we solved the problem. But let's be honest, none of these things were easy. Most of these things took months to solve. In some cases, we started out with misinformation. When I talked about that issue with the roof leak coming down and the fungus feeding beetles, initially they had been identified by somebody else as flower beetles, and we couldn't figure out how we were getting flower beetles. For 3 months, we were looking for the wrong thing. So once we did identify it, it probably took us another 3 months to figure out there was a roof leak, where it was, and how to fix it. So, you know, I may be making this sound easy. It is definitely not, as many of you probably know. So whether it's going to be pheromone monitors, insect light traps, glue boards, even sighting logs, monitors are going to be vital to assist you in identifying hotspots. You can think of these as kind of an extra employee that's sitting there working 24/7, pointing you in the right direction of when things start to go off. They can point you to hotspots that then you can develop those corrective actions for. They can tell you where things are going wrong. I mentioned that situation where we had all of a sudden had a bunch of extra night flying insects showing up in those insect light traps. Well, up until that point, things were good, you know, maybe one or two, but all of a sudden we knew something was wrong. And we could go to that particular area, focus on that particular hotspot. They can also tell you when things are going right. When we shut those doors and when we found out it was the construction crews that were propping them open, when we got them shut, the problem went away. And our monitors told us that. Our monitors told us that our corrective action fixed that hotspot. So you have to analyze that data and you have to use that data. And then it can be very, very helpful. because really, and when I mentioned those sighting logs, again, frontline employees know what's going on, and they can really help you because everyone really does have a role to play, even if it's just using their eyes, even if it's just looking around and going, oh, I think I saw a mouse run through that hole through the door. If they know who to tell, if they know who to report that to, again, that hotspot can be taken care of very, very quickly. And you're only dealing with that one mouse that got in instead of all of her little friends coming in for the 3 weeks after before you get that door fixed. So everyone has a role to play in this, but do they know that? Do they know what their role is and who to report these issues to and how to report these issues? In most cases, most pest control companies offer complimentary trainings for your staff, and that can be anything from a nice, quick 10 or 15-minute training of what to look for as they're out there on the floor, to full day trainings on, how to run, how to look at the pest control program, how to assist in the pest control program, and how to make it better. So definitely check out that as well. Documentation. Oh, what can I say about documentation? Um, Nobody really likes it. All of us have to do it. So do the documentation. If you don't write it down, it didn't happen. And I'm assuming that most of you go through some type of audit program and are dealing with at least one audit system, if not multiple. So write it down. Document what you need to document for those programs. And again, if you have a third party doing your pest control program, they should be keeping track of all of their documentation. But you still need to understand it. You still need to understand what those monitoring logs look like and what the pest activity is doing, and what kind of corrective actions you can take and what kind of corrective actions your pest management company has taken. So make sure you understand that documentation so that you can talk to an auditor about this and show them what's been done. As I mentioned, audits, hotspots, and problem areas are something that auditors want to see. Auditors know that your site is not perfect. I'm sorry, I really want your sites to be absolutely perfect, but let's be honest, the nature of what you do leaves you open for potential for pests. So auditors want to see those inspection reports. They need to see that documentation and any corrective actions you've done. And if you need more on audit prep, we have some great resources online that you can use. And again, reach out to us here and we can provide you some more information on that. Again, didn't really go too much into disinfection. Wanted to focus on our pests and our hot spots here. But if you do need more information on disinfection services, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Happy to provide some more information on that. But great resources online as well. You can follow Orkin on LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn, so you're more than welcome to connect with me. And I'm more than happy to talk with you by email, phone, whatever. My email is up there, mhartzer@rollins.com. Love to talk to you about specific issues that might be going on at your particular facility and how we can troubleshoot them. The problem-solving aspect of pest management makes it challenging, but also makes it a little bit fun. So yes, I'm a little bit of a geek when it comes to that, but it is sort of fun for me to have a problem and eventually find a way to fix it and find a way to mitigate it. So as we talked about all those hot spots, I'm sure that you thought of some in your facility that we covered. I'm sure you thought of some that we haven't covered. So definitely check that out. Think about walking around your facility at different times of the day. Don't forget those night inspections. You'll be surprised at what you said and what you saw out there. So definitely go for that. So, all right, with that, definitely want to thank you all for being here. This has been great. Amazing to see so many of you on here. And I think, Simon, we're going to open it up for some questions if we have any questions.
Yes, definitely. I'll just get rid of the slides. Fantastic, that, Chelle. Thank you. Yes, let's get straight into the questions then. First one from Waka. What chemicals can be used for drain cleaning?
Great question. I would normally I'd suggest something with a biological agent to it. You know, those good bacteria that can break down all the gunk. You want a foaming drain cleaner because again, that foam sticks to it, allows it to really break it down and then flush it down. Different countries are going to have slightly different products, but I would look for those two factors in your product. Make sure it's a foaming product, and if it can, some type of microbial action to it.
Great. Okay. And next one, Anna. How are pest control contracts determined? I have seen that indicate allowable tolerance, e.g., 1 rat allowed, 10 fruit flies allowed. How do
Well,
you
I
arrive?
certainly don't want one rat in any of my products. So let's take a step back. In the United States, we have something called action levels that allow for naturally occurring items to be in food. So if I have a jar of pitless cherries, the defect action level is that within that jar, I'm going to find one pit. So we do, for certain foods, have certain allowable limits. Now, in most of the industry, those limits are much higher. You know, the government sets it here, and we say, nah, we're going to do better than that. So it depends on which type of food you have, what food product, and if there are defect action levels for that. So that's something to discuss with your suppliers and something to discuss with your particular pest management professional.
Okay, thank you. And Pradeep, are installing louvres helpful to ensure that external drain lines do not carry the infestation inside?
There's a couple different products that can be used on drains that basically allow, you know, liquid and product to flow the direction that they're supposed to, but nothing to come back up through that drain. So again, different products in different areas. We have a great product in the United States called a green drain that, again, you can install it. It allows liquid moisture to flow through, but then when nothing's flowing through, it kind of curls up at the ends, but nothing can crawl back up it. So yeah, check into what you might have available in your specific area.
Okay, next one, Newman. Can we use the CC, is it I4 or 1,4 in gaseous state for killing off microbes and the pests that are present in our environment? Does that
Oh,
mean
okay.
anything to you?
So I'll talk in general about fumigation. Fumigation is of course using a gas to fill an area, and for insects, it then gets brought in through the respiratory system and kills them. Again, different products in different countries. In the United States, we have 2 different gases that we are allowed to use in certain food facilities. For microbial control, there is a product, one product in the United States that uses chlorine dioxide as a gaseous fumigant to kill microbes. Again, we probably just have to check into what's specifically available in your area for your particular situation, but we can use fumigations for insects and microbes.
I've just got a question, Chelle, if you don't mind. With
Sure.
COVID-19, obviously,
Yeah.
it had to come up. We're in the middle of it, the midst of it. How is this affecting pest control service providers? How are they operating during this time? And also, what should we be asking our pest control contractors?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, I'm still working, so Orkin's still out there doing their thing. When we think about it, and again, I'll be specific to the United States since that's where I am. Our food industry is an essential service. We need those food products, so all of those sites are still open. They're still producing, still have employees in them. And so our folks are still going in to service them and make sure that they are safe and free from pests and monitoring those hotspots. So from our aspect in the food industry, we are still working, we are still doing our thing. From a standpoint of how we do it, of course, I think everybody, both the pest control operators and the food facilities, are trying to be a little bit more careful, and certainly, you know, making sure that they wear their mask, making sure that they wash their hands for that full 30 seconds, and making sure that they take every personal precaution that they possibly can. So I think that might be the only difference, is that they're just more aware of those personal issues. But from a business standpoint, I still don't want bugs in my oatmeal raisin cookies, so I still want our Orkin personnel in those facilities making sure that my cookies are bug free.
Yeah, sure. Uh, Ivana, is it allowed to use adhesive sheets in pest control boxes?
That depends on where you are. I know that there are some countries that do not allow glue boards or adhesive sheets. So you'd have to check on your local and federal country regulations. In the United States, we use glue boards quite a bit as monitoring devices, and we especially use them inside some of our rodent boxes, again, to contain and to monitor those pests. So just double check with what country you're in to make sure that those are allowable.
Okay, and can you offer Pradeep any advice? Please suggest the proper product available internationally to reduce scaling of drains to reduce infestation of drain flies.
Oh, you're going to have to check with your local folks on that one. I wish I had an answer for you, but I I don't know.
Okay, Anna, for sites that want to maintain and conduct their own pest control inspections, what training is given and how is competency verified since they may not have the same expertise as Orkin?
Of course you don't have the same expertise as us. We're awesome. No, I'm kidding. You guys, there's lots of folks that still do their own in-house, and that's great. I would say there's lots of good resources out there. IFSQN, I'm sure, has some resources on doing audits. We do have information on Orkin sites about performing those audits. So there's plenty of training programs that you can look for. Might be specific to your area, might be live in person when we can go back out and do that when this is all over. Um, and for the verification, I would suggest continuous training. It's something that I do. I mean, every year I'm taking additional courses, reading materials. So just keeping up at least once a year with your regulations, whether those are the federal regulations, company regulations, or industry regulations, at least once a year, check those, and that could be your verification step.
Okay, and another one from Ivana. What's the best way to record insects in UV lamps?
With a pen and a paper. The first thing you want to do is one, make sure that you're recording species. I mean, there is a difference between a moth that flew in from the outside and a fly that might have gotten in from the inside. So you want to make sure that you differentiate, at least in general, the species that are on those insect light traps, and then count them. They're usually gridded out. So if you have a glue board that's just totally encased, consistently pick the same squares and count those, because you need that consistency to see those trends and what it's doing. So there's a couple options for you.
Makes sense. And April, the question in there is it unacceptable to install bait stations or insect traps within production areas, such as preparation, cooking, or packing areas?
Absolutely not. We, as a industry rule, almost never use rodent bait on the inside of a food facility, just because of the potential for contamination. Now, there are extreme cases where we might do that, but from an insect standpoint, there's lots of baits that we use. And the great thing about baits is that we can get them very targeted in very specific areas so that they're not going to be contamination issues. So rodent baits, really typically not. Insect baits and other monitoring devices, perfectly fine. Just analyze what the risk is. Is there a risk of it getting into a processing line? Don't put it there. Put it somewhere else.
Okay, and a question from Simin. How can infestation be detected and tracked? What if the source is not a hotspot?
That's a good one, especially if it's coming from outside or it's being delivered in from one of your suppliers. I'm a huge fan of monitoring. Monitoring allows an extra set of eyes to be out there 24/7. So, having that monitoring program, not just in your hotspots, but as a general across the field, is going to be able to alert you to when that comes up. And when it does, you can always, narrow down your grid of monitoring devices to kind of isolate that. But for this particular question, go with the monitors.
Okay, and I'd like to know this. Insha, what exactly does the integrated in IPMs mean?
Integrated means we're using all the tools that we have. We're integrating sanitation and exclusion and monitoring, and we're creating this mesh of all of these tools that we have. Because if we don't use all of those tools, say we don't have exclusion, you've left that door open. It doesn't matter how much treatment you just did. It doesn't matter how clean your facility is. You've left the door open, so the pests are going to come back in. So by meshing all of these tools and using them together, we create the system that has a really good chance of minimizing pest issues and eliminating them in some cases.
Okay, thank you. Lucas, how do we close holes in walls? Is steel wool and PE foam a good idea against rodents?
I really recommend it as permanent a fix as you can possibly do. Two of the products that we use are Copper Stuff It. The product name is Stuff It. And we also use a product called Excluder, which has little bits of metal in it, and then seal that up into that hole. Foam, rodents can typically chew through foam. Now, I will say, if you're looking for something temporary and you're trying to find out where they're coming in, sometimes using that foam and saying, okay, this one's not chewed through, this one's not, this one's still sealed up, that one has been chewed through, you know which way the pathway they're using, and seal up that one permanently first. But really, as permanent a seal and as hardy a seal as you can put on that, the better.
Okay, and Srini Vasalu, any standard for pest control chemicals in the food industry?
Yes, read the label. Pesticides have a label on them. If they say do not use on food contact surfaces, do not contaminate food, follow that label. In the United States, I have a nice list of products that can be used in food processing. And where they can be used. We never want to contaminate food or food contact surfaces. So that's step one, is don't put anything on the lines or on the food itself. And step two is read those labels and follow those labels.
Okay, and so is the attic of a food processor a hotspot?
Oh, yes. If you have some kind of drop ceiling or attic area, again, I'm guessing you don't get up there very much. It doesn't get inspected. And think of the pathways of things and food getting up there. So yes, and one of the things I like to do for attic areas, especially if we think we may be having a problem, is using trail cams or game cams, that hunters use to look for deer or turkey. We can put those up in the drop ceilings, and then if that mouse, that rat runs through, we know that we've got a problem. So that's a cool little useful tip too.
Okay, very good. And EHAB, what about UV fly killer lights? How do we know that the right frequency, that they're effective?
Sure. One, buy the bulbs that go into that insect light trap. The bulbs are pretty specific, so I'm guessing that if you get any bulbs for your ILTs, they are right. However, they do degrade over time. Usually they have an effective life of about 9 to 12 months. So we always suggest switching out those bulbs in spring. Spring here in the United States, when it starts to warm up and those pest populations start to creep up, our insect light traps are at their highest light output. So they're that attractive, and they're all the way through the summer. And then when it gets to fall and that attractiveness starts to fall off just a little bit, it's not so bad because our natural populations are going down. So yes, buy the correct bulbs that are labeled for use in that light trap, and then change them out at least every 12 months.
Okay, and Maulik, are you aware of any standards, or does Orkin have any standards or modules that explain typical pests for different types of foods, e.g. peanuts, milk, powder, tree nuts,
Oh.
etc.?
I don't believe we do, but you may be able to find some of that information on the internet. There may be something specific out there.
Okay, and Dr. Ahmed El Masalami, can we regard ERD, systematic approach, exclusion, restriction, and destruction, still suitable for IPM in modern viewpoint?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think as long as you're trying to look at the system, the nice thing about IPM, is it shifts to looking for those underlying conditions, not just putting a band-aid on something and saying, okay, spray some pesticide and walk away. No. Why did this problem occur? How do we solve the underlying issues? So absolutely. I think as long as you're looking at the system and trying to solve those underlying conditions that may have caused that pest problem or may cause a pest problem, absolutely, whatever tools you have.
Okay, Stephen, other webinar briefings are suggesting that with businesses in furlough or shut down with COVID, there is a buildup of pests or can be. Does this mean there will be increased risk when normal production continues?
Yes, absolutely. One thing unfortunately, in the United States, a lot of people, went on shopping sprees when this started and bought up tons and tons of dry goods. That's all sitting in their basements and their garages now. And as that sits there for longer and longer and longer, it's going to cause pest problems. The exact same thing is going to happen with businesses that are shut down, whether that's a restaurant, whether that's a warehouse. The longer a product sits there, the more chance it has of getting infested.
Okay, and Brandon, how often should we change pheromone traps on the exterior of the building?
Oh, that depends on what type of pheromone it is. I would look at the manufacturer recommendations on that.
Okay, how to control spiders?
I love spiders. They eat the insects. um,
True.
Honestly, think of that. Again, go back to food, water, and shelter. What are spiders eating? Spiders are typically eating insects. So, how do you control the insects around there? If there's no food source, the spiders won't be there. Spiders are typically a little challenging to control from a chemical standpoint. So, if we look at habitat modification, trimming down those trees, making sure there's not lots of clutter, and eliminating the insect problem, their food source, you typically don't have much of a spider problem.
Makes sense, yeah. Ashish, is fumigation allowed inside packaging material storage areas?
It depends on what else you may have in there. If it's just packaging and it's food packaging, in most cases, yes.
Okay, and spiders. How many countries does Orkin provide service in?
Oh my gosh, you had to ask me that. I want to say we are in over 82 countries right now. We definitely have a worldwide presence, and if you're interested, if Orkin is in your area, again, feel free to contact me, and I can point you to your nearest Orkin branch.
Okay, and Anna, best deterrent for birds?
Again, habitat modification. If there's no place for them to sit, no place for them to roost, no food for them, they are going to go somewhere else. So like in the case, I brought up the geese earlier. Geese like those wet areas. They like those ponds. We actually wound up stringing bird wire over the ponds so they couldn't land in there. Since they didn't have that habitat anymore, they went somewhere else to find their habitat. So it's about habitat modification and making sure there's no food source for them.
Okay, and Anders has been very efficient. He's got all his questions into one. Should you record your daily pest sightings on your weekly pest control monitoring form, or should you keep a separate pest sighting log? And also, any tips on trending pest findings?
If we're talking about a pest sighting log for like the employees at your facility, I would say if something gets found, write down the date. And if that's happening daily, do it daily. Whether you want that, I think I would prefer a separate form just so that, as you're looking at it, you can see these are the sightings that our plant has had. These are our sightings from our monitoring devices. That's just me personally. If it works for you the other way, go for it. Any tips? I like graphs. I like to see the picture. I like pretty colors on the graph. So I like to take my data and graph it because that's easier for me to see that movement, those trends. But whatever works best for you, really.
Okay, and Maud, do any pesticides have food grade properties?
I would encourage you to read the label on whatever you have. In most cases, especially in the United States, we are not going to apply a pesticide to a food in most cases.
No. Ehumemi? How can one control termites in a storage area?
Well, termites are after wood, so I would encourage you to find what they're feeding on. Again, go back to that food source. So they may be coming up through concrete and creating tunnels, but there's got to be a colony somewhere, and there's got to be a food source somewhere. So if you can find the food source, in the United States, we have great baits for termites that are very effective at taking out the colonies. So, but you really got to get that close to the colonies. So find the food source, find the colony.
Michael, protecting from birds. So with bird spikes, anything else?
Yeah, I mean, there are bird deterrent products out there, bird spikes, bird wires, scare devices. There's an actual a liquid product that it's made from grapeseed extract that really bothers their nasal cavities. So birds are pretty tricky though, and that's a very customized solution. So if you want to reach out to me and tell me, what type of bird and what's going on, we can probably devise something for your site.
Okay, very good. Irina, best way to fix glue traps to avoid unintentional movement?
Put them somewhere else. If you put a device down and you find it keeps getting moved, it's not a good place for that device. With glue boards, a lot of times we put them inside a bait station with no rodent bait or no insect bait, or we'll put them in a trap, in a box multi-catch trap. That's an option as well.
Okay, and Sherdine, what is the recommended height of insecticutors or fly lights from the ceiling?
Ideally, you want them about eye level. Most of our pests are going to fly in that kind of 5 to 6 foot range, kind of up to about 3 meters, 2 meters high. So you want them that kind of eye level range, if at all possible.
Okay, and Rokshanra, how many moth findings at a time triggers a red flag?
It's your facility. You tell me. How many moths are okay for you to have in that facility? When we talk about those thresholds of how many is okay, it's very site specific. So it's a good thing to talk to your provider about and discuss what might be normal for your facility and where you want that trigger to be.
Okay, and Cecilia, recommended frequency for the treatment of German cockroaches.
Well, ideally once and you're done. Stop letting them in. And no, again, that's dependent. I would say, I have some sites that the German cockroach problem when I walked in was so bad that I was there every single night for a week. And then I got to taper that off because we started getting it under control. I would say, how bad is the problem? Where is the problem? And what are you doing to treat? And that is going to determine how frequently you need to do that.
Okay, and Maulik, is there a standard in the US for accreditation of pest control providers?
Yes, your pest control provider should be licensed and insured, and that will be either a greater company registration. Usually, you'll have a state business registration as well, and for most states, you have to have at least for your office, your unit, at least a certified individual who has their individual license. In some cases, everybody that works for that business unit has to be licensed. So reach out to your individual one and find out what they have.
Okay, Sherdine, the best way to address a spike in live roaches inside and outside?
Oh, okay. Outside. Ooh. Switch gears. Inside. Find out where they're coming in. Find out the food that they're eating on. Try and clean up that sanitation issue, and then treatment as needed. Outside, prevention. Trying to keep them on the outside. Number one, and treatment. And again, if you can clean up the sanitation issue that they're feeding on, great. If not, again, trying to ensure that they don't come inside is going to be your key.
Okay, and JS, I think about lockdown. What precautions need to be taken post-lockdown?
Oh, in the food industry, again, your sanitation and disinfection levels are much higher than anybody else, and is something that you folks have already done throughout the years. So I would say, employee testing, ensuring that your employees are not coming in with anything. But from a pest management standpoint, honestly, not much. If you've been shut down, you're probably going to need a bit more service and a bit more attention. But if you've been running through this whole thing, it's kind of business as normal.
Okay, and Monica, I noticed random pest activity on the label cabinet. We have Orkin. Besides not allowing food and drink, what else can we do on the label cabinet?
Ooh, Monica, you're going to have to clarify that just a little bit more for me.
Okay. I've lost my place now. Is this enough questions for you, this, Chelle?
What? Come on. If there's still more questions, let's go. I'll give you another 4 minutes, folks. How about that?
Okay. Tony, is ultrasonic device a good tool to exclude rodents?
Nope. Doesn't work. Has been proven not to work. So don't use anything that says ultrasonic. It's useless. You've wasted money.
Okay. Michael, do you have any experience in using Scion insecticide in the food industry?
Yep. I don't like to do any, specific pesticide recommendations in a case like this, because I don't know what your pest issue is. I don't know where you're using it. But yes, I have used Scion before.
Okay. And if a batch of products is infested by a rodent, is the whole batch discarded, or is the rodent just carefully removed? What about rodents somehow entering during a continuous process?
Yeah, that's what makes it tough sometimes, because we are running 24/7. So what do? I would refer you back to your local laws. For us in the United States, the whole batch would likely be discarded because it would be considered contaminated.
Okay, Veronica, is there a way to stop sow bugs entering?
Sealing. Yep, absolutely.
Sealing.
They're coming from the soil outside. They're like millipedes. They're moisture loving in the soil and breaking down all those nutrients in the soil. So check your door seals, check your entry points, keep them on the outside.
Okay, is a pigeon a pest?
Say, what was that one again?
Pigeon. Is a pigeon a pest?
Yeah, I think it's a rat with wings. To me, anything that's going to contaminate a food is a pest. And again, like the geese I talked about, what goes in comes out. And if those pigeons are leaving their droppings everywhere, that's an issue. And the more pigeons you have, the more chance of them getting in through an open dock door or something. So yes, pigeons are absolutely a pest.
How to deal with silverfish? Keep them out?
I'd keep them out again, yes.
Okay. This is Usman, define pest. Which method is best to control the pest in the food industry? Biological, chemical, or physical?
Yes. A pest is anything out of time, out of place. And by that definition, my little sister is a pest. Probably can't use chemical controls on her. So, but no, again, if we bring it back to integrated pest management, we want to use all the tools that we have. So, we want to use some of those biological controls if we can. We are definitely going to use some chemical controls, and physical controls are extremely important. Sweeping the floor and getting rid of a food source, that's a physical control.
Okay. Monica has just come back. We store the labels for the printer to label the pallets. So that's more information. Is it best that she contacts her Orkin rep?
Yeah, you might want to get that, again, take a closer look at that, and just find out what's going on with that particular situation, and have your local folks, give you some recommendations on that one.
Okay. Fires has put this question a number of times, so I will ask, but identify IPM approach clause from ISO 9001:2015 version and realized on risk-based or prevention. Does it make any sense to you?
Oh, so just in very general terms, yes, we are looking at risk base. We are looking at those underlying conditions, and we are looking at what are the risks of having those pests, and trying to prevent them. If we know that we have a risk of pigeons because there's a giant tree that has 1,000 pigeons in it right outside of our dock door, that's a risk, and we want to prevent that risk from coming inside. So just in general, yes, risk-based preventative controls is what FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act here in the US, is pushing towards.
Last few questions then. Most commonly overlooked hotspot?
Roofs.
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 Most dangerous detrimental pest?
Humans.
Humans. That's deep.
We'll just leave it at that.
We could talk all night about that.
Yeah.
How to fumigate cooling tunnels? That's from Nilesh.
Very carefully and with your local experts.
Okay, and whether the guys on the call have Orkin or some other pest control supplier, what should we be talking to them, be asking them?
What's going on? I think the most important question that I like to get if I'm, the person doing the weekly or every other week service is, what can I do to help you? As the person in charge of overseeing pest control, the QA person or the manager or whatever at that site, what can we do to help you? And what should we know about what's going on? So just that general communication.
Brilliant. Right. Fantastic job. I know we've run over, but it's great. We don't like to leave unanswered questions, and you've done a fantastic job there, Chelle. So thanks very much today. Have you enjoyed it?
I had a great time. These questions are amazing. You folks are amazing.
Yeah. Okay. We'll hope to see you again soon. I'll let you get back to your PCQI training.
All right. Bye, folks. Have a good afternoon. Have a good morning, wherever you are.
Take care, Chelle. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, that was Chelle Hartzer from Orkin. Thanks for your attendance today. Thanks for your questions. Been really engaging webinar. We'll see you on the next one. Take care. Thanks very much. Bye.